בוקר טוב לכולם, בוקר טוב לכולם. Good morning, everybody. Ladies, here are the source sheets, the same ones as last week. I wasn't here, so.
Do you need one for yourself?
I have.
You're welcome.
Good, good.
I did. I forgot the mask. I walked home. I called Clara, but she
Actually, when you go, and you can get
Everyone that I know you have the whole school.
I have
Did they close?
They're
went-
open, they're still open. We still have some teachers, but I'm on like some chats still and people are like, it's
Neria and Ariel.
Miami is closed. Yeah, no, I mean, I spoke to Suzanne last week and she's like, they're just waiting for the others.
yeah.
You just have to like.
They just have to-
Just stop. You never want to get your asymptomatic.
Right.
No more testing.
That's what they're saying. They're saying like, and also if you've been vaccinated and you've been exposed, they say don't even bother quarantine, because otherwise the whole country is going to shut down.
Here it's you have to quarantine. It's a regular, if it's Omicron, then you have to go into the
I think they're changing it. I think they're changing that whole scenario now. Now they're gonna, of course, the wedding that I have this week, they're gonna lift the travel ban next week.
We're reading for might have Omicron. We're waiting for the bus group. You guys are not on the bus group. I'm like the only.
Yes, you're the only parent on the bus group. And I told Gila not to add me. She showed me that you were on, like, no thanks.
Okay.
Because like it's not worth them on it. I get so annoyed.
All right, ladies,
So,
here's the bottom line. Let's just, and none of you are Facebook friends of mine, which is you can be, but you don't have to be. But last week I went off on a rant because somebody's like, it's horrible that people can't travel to the US. I'm like, okay, people, I'm a child of Holocaust survivors. Let's not use the word horrible so cavalierly.
using the actual comparison to this is like concentration camps.
Yeah, or horrible is being sick and dying. No, horrible is, Khalila. Let's be a little bit careful with the use of the word horrible. Perspective,
Can I
perspective.
start recording?
You can start recording. Okay?
Yeah, we're recording, you need to start.
Good, we're recording. We're good, we're on. Okay. All hail King Saul. But it takes a little while. Okay, quick catch up review from 2 weeks ago when we were more or less here and okay. We've been talking since the beginning of the year, king, no king, prophet, king, right? And now this is what we're going to get to this week is really where things start to take off. It seems, and I'm going to emphasize the word seems from the text, that Shmuel is extremely ambivalent about the idea of having a king. It certainly seems from the text that Shaul himself is ambivalent about the idea of being a king. That's going to become much, much more evident in what we're going to work on this week. Again, we had whole conversation, Binyamin, Yehuda. Was it a setup? Was it not a setup? What was the whole deal with Shaul? And where we left off, I believe 2 weeks ago, was the very, very, very end of Perek Tet, the very beginning of Perek Yud, where Shmuel greets Shaul, really welcomes him very publicly, or at least publicly in terms of the inner circle, takes Shaul completely by surprise. And at the end of this dinner party, takes Shaul up onto the roof. And then we had a conversation about what happened on the roof. What did Shmuel tell Shaul on the roof? And again, what Shmuel told Shaul on the roof in terms of what the Mefarshim say, whether he was giving him musar or whether he was just telling him, okay, this is what's going to happen when you leave, right? Just like I told you, I, Shmuel, told you was going to happen when you leave. Or on a kind of more positive note, that he was sharing with him the mysteries of the universe, kind of similar to the way Hashem shared the mysteries of the universe with Abraham right before he changed his name from Avram to Abraham, right? So there's going to be a transformation of character here, similar to Abraham's, and Shmuel as the Navi, right, as the voice of Hashem, rather than as Hashem himself. Hang on one second, told him, what was going to happen. Yes.
But I thought he was this perfect person. Why did he need to have an evolution or change?
So again, that's Rashi sees Shaul pretty darkly. In other words, what Rashi is doing even beforehand is that Rashi is saying, we know that this is going to go south, and it was going to go south. Shmuel knew it was going to go south. It was going to go bad. And Shmuel was already kind of warning Shaul. That's Rashi's perspective on this, as opposed to the Abarbanel's perspective, which is the things are good until they are not, right? We're not going to predict things going wrong, because if we predict things going wrong, basically what we're doing is we're taking free choice from people. And the Abarbanel, that's like absolutely similar to the Rambam, right? Line in the sand, very Aristotelian. People have free choice, no matter what. They can make their own decisions. And then there are consequences that roll out of those decisions. And again, the butterfly over the Himalayas, sometimes the consequences, grow and grow and grow and grow. But the Abarbanel is not going to set Shaul up to stumble and fall until he absolutely does. And then the Malbim, profound optimist that he really is. And this is throughout Tanakh. And it's really remarkable because the Malbim's personal life was not so optimistic. I mean, literally had kind of a life of Job. He had to go from pillar to post. He was too secular for Poland, and he was too frum for like Budapest and Vienna. And he started a business, and his partner stole from him, and then his house burnt down. Like really horrible things happening to him. Nevertheless, when it came to Torah, his outlook was completely, life is beautiful. The soul is beautiful. As long as you listen to the soul, you're fine. And it's actually, it always moves me when I think about it. So those perspectives come through in how they're interpreting an event that's unwritten. So that's where we're at right now. Okay, so we're at the beginning of Perek Yud, we're at the beginning of chapter 10. And I think I have in the source sheet, yeah.
Is there any modern thinker that just talks about like mental illness?
We're getting there. We're going not this week, next week. We're going to spend.
Everything can be nice and dandy till something,
Absolutely. There's in my mind, and again, I'm coming from the background of a psychologist, and I have some degrees in the field. If Shaul were alive today, he would absolutely be diagnosed as bipolar. There's no question.
No, so we can see even if someone becomes bipolar in his 40s,
100%.
during his childhood, there are some things that
Right.
we can retroactive.
Correct. And we're going to see those retroactives like now, right? In his nomination and election. And I'm sorry to use the term, either nomination and election, because either it sounds like it's political or it sounds like it's Christian. But those are the only terms that we have here. So at the beginning of Perek Yud, so that's where we are right now. End of very last Sukkim of Perek Tet, beginning Sukkim of Perek Yud, end of chapter 9, beginning of chapter 10. Okay, so now it's going, just as an FYI, it's going to take another Perek and a half before Shaul actually is accepted as king. When that moment when Shaul is accepted as king is like literally the high point of his monarchy, which is so sad, but so it is. Okay. You can turn the heat on. We can close the
I'm fine
door.
now. No, it was like I came to class too fast after, showering, and I'm still.
Okay. All right.
I just needed to.
So I
regulate.
believe it's Perek Yud Pasuk Aleph where he literally sends him off with a kiss, or is at the end of Perek Tet? I don't have it in front of me.
Which part? Which sukkim?
I don't know if it's the last Pasuk of Perek Tet or the first Pasuk of Perek Yud, where it says that Shmuel gave him a kiss and sent him on his way.
That's the first pasuk.
Okay, so Tzipi, can you do me a favor and read Pasuk Aleph, please?
ויקח שמואל את פח השמן ויצוק על ראשו וישקהו.
Okay, so Shmuel takes the Pach HaShemen and he anoints him and he kisses him. What's interesting is that this anointment was just mentioned in Masechet Megillah, that the difference between David and Shaul is that David was anointed with a keren, with a ram's horn. And what they would do is they would fill the horn with oil, and then they would fill these horns. They were multi-purpose things. They would fill them with wine. They would fill them with oil. They would fill them, think of the idea of the cornucopia. They would turn them around, use them for shofar, multi-purpose thing. Here, David was anointed with a keren. Shaul was anointed with a pach and with a jug. And the Gemara says, why? What's the difference? Because again, hindsight is 2020, but a pach is something that can be broken. So Shaul, and for that matter, Yehu, are both anointed with a pach, with a jug, because it almost foreshadows the fact that their monarchy is not going to be permanent. Whereas a keren, which is something very hard, is virtually unbreakable, right? Also, a keren is something that's natural, comes from nature, that this is a natural melucha. In other words, this is the way it's supposed to be, as opposed to a pach, which is crafted by hand. And we know that things that are crafted by man trachten die Eibishter, right? Things that we think that we can control, not so much. The Gemara also talks about this kiss, and I'm sorry, I forgot to bring the sources in this week's source sheet. I
From last week.
think they're on last week's, right? Or two, whatever, what was supposed to be 2 weeks ago. There are 3 kisses that are significant, that are mentioned. This is one of them, right? So the Midrash says that there are all kisses that are mentioned in Tanakh are insignificant. The Midrash uses the word tiflut, or like narishkeit, except for 3 of them. This is one of them. The other one is the kiss that Moshe and Aaron exchanged when they met. And then there's a machloket about the third one. Is it the kiss that Yosef gave Binyamin? Is it the kiss that Yaakov gave Esav? Or is it the kiss that Yaakov gave Rachel? So there's a bit of it, and there are different midrashim. When I say that there's a debate, there are different versions. But this kiss is on all the lists. So that this kiss that Shmuel gives to Shaul when he sends him on his way, again, is a very, very poignant moment, because you almost get the feeling that Shmuel kind of submits to the will of Hashem. Not only that, but now that he has met Shaul and spent a night with Shaul and kind of gets a sense of who this person is, he almost falls in love with Shaul. And the reason I use the expression he falls in love, and I don't mean chas v'chalila in any kind of physical way, but in the sense of like he buys into Shaul, and his buying into Shaul so deeply is again a little bit of an indication of why when Shaul doesn't work out, he's so deeply pained. Right? He has such an intense reaction to Shaul's failure. Okay? All right. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go into these psukim here in terms of what Shmuel says. 3 things are gonna happen. Okay? And again, you can view the events, the numbers, the details as random. Okay. In other words, Shmuel is saying this is what's going to happen. Not particularly significant what this is, except that it happens. Okay? That's basically the approach that the Ralbag takes. The Ralbag Gersonides, who is if I'm not making up my centuries wrong.
Heard that. Gersonides?
Really? Gersonides, Ralbag?
Ralbag.
Ralbag. He's called Gersonides in English. Ides is like the son of in Latin, right? Maimonides, son of Maimon, Nachmanides, son of Nachman, right? Gersonides, son of Gerson.
Oh, that's so funny. Never heard that.
There you go. Now you've learned something new. Now, why? There you go. There's your lesson for today. You can all go home now. Ralbag is Gersonides. So the Ralbag lived in Provence. He was, I believe, either a generation before the Ramban or a generation, I think it's a generation after the Ramban. I don't remember. Go check out Dr. Google. But what's important to know about the Ralbag is that he's a rationalist, which is kind of interesting for that part of the world. You don't get too many rationalists coming out of Provence. Most of people coming out of Christian Europe, right? The Tosafists, Ramban, anybody who's kind of intersects with Christian Europe is in many ways much more Musar driven and to some degree mystical driven. The rationalists are the Muslims. And then we do a bit of a switch, right? That's one of the things that happens in Lita is that we do a switch. And all of a sudden, the quote unquote Ashkenazim become the uber rationalists because of the Vilna Gaon, who has adopted Maimonides, right? Who is a Muslim coming out of a Greek tradition. So now it's the Litvaks, it's the Briskers who are all super rational, and the Hasidim, and to some degree the Sfaradim, who are perceived as more mystical. It's all one tone. Anyway, but there's a long tradition of what are known as Hasidei Ashkenaz, like these very, very mystical, very, very spiritual Ashkenazi Jews. These are the ones that pulled their children out from under the beds and killed them so that they shouldn't be baptized, right? It's that fervor, that very not rational, I don't want to call it irrational, but not rational fervor. So the Ralbag is a rationalist, and he says, and the source is a little bit further down, that basically Shmuel gives him 3 signs. He sees the future, he sees what's going to happen, A, B, C. And he tells him what they are. And the big event is the last event, right? Because the big event is the event where he meets up with these prophets, he meets these Nevi'im, we're going to get there, and he himself receives Nevuah. So no significance whatsoever. The Malbim, on the other end of the exegetical spectrum, right? The Malbim, again, remember, is somebody who is absolutely committed to this concept that's called omni-significance. It's a concept I imagine you've heard before, right? I think I've talked about it before. The idea that every single word, every single event every single number is significant. So the Malbim makes a huge deal out of all of the events that happen here. I've only excerpted what he said, but if you would like, open up your Sefaria or your Malbim or whatever, and I mean, paragraphs about, and he really gives kind of a thesis here as to what Shaul is encountering and why. So I want to go through with you a little bit of it and look at it. Okay, Tzipi, go ahead. If you could please read Psukim Bet Gimel Dalet Hey, and I left out Vav at the end. So I left out Aleph and I left out Vav. I apologize.
Do you want me to read? Well, so I'll finish Aleph.
Yep.
Because I stopped in the middle. Vayomer Halo Ki Nishachcha Hashem Al Nachato L'Nagid.
Okay.
Balachtacha Hayom Me'imati Umatzata Shnei Anashim Im Kfurat Rachel Bigvul Binyamin B'Tzel Tzach ואמרו אליך נמצאו האתונות אשר הלכת לבקש והנה נטש אביך את דברי האתונות ודאג לכם לאמור מה אעשה לבני.
Okay, stop. Okay, sign number 1. You're going to go from here. You're going to go past this place called Kivrat Rachel in Binyamin. Open parentheses, big conversation amongst the Mefarshim. Is it the same Kiva Rachel? Is it a different Kiva Rachel? What Kever Rachel is it? What's the real Kever Rachel? Will the real Rachel please stand up, right? Not going down that road. There is a machloket, right? Please note the name of the place that they're going to. Seems like a random place named Seltzach, because that name, according to the Malbim, is not so random. And then that the sound of that Seltzach, that word is going to become significant, right? So you're going to meet up in this place called Seltzach. You're going to meet 2 people, and they are going to initiate a conversation with you that's purely informational. And they're going to say, oh, just want to let you know, we found the donkeys. they're fine, your father's fine, everything's fine. So that's sign number one. Sign number two,
וחלפת משם והלאה, ובאת עד אילון תבור, ומצאוך שם 3 אנשים עולים אל האלוהים בית אל, אחד נושא 3 גדיים, ואחד נושא 3 כיכרות לחם, ואחד נושא נרו יין. ושאלו לך,
go ahead, keep it. Yeah.
ושאלו לך לשלום, ונתנו לך 2 לחם ולקחת מידם.
Okay, so now sign number two. Okay, you're gonna go and you're gonna get to Tabor. Again, unclear where this Tabor is because the Har Tabor that we know is much further north, right? And these people are on their way to Beit El. So again, we're probably somewhere in this region. Now you're gonna meet 3 people. Those 3 people, one is carrying or leading 3 goats, one is carrying bread, and one is carrying wine. And they're going to, ask how you are. Hi, how are you? And they're going to give you bread. And so that whole interlude is sign number 2. Sign number 3, go ahead.
אחר כן תבוא גבעת האלוהים אשר שם נציבי פלישתים, והיא כבואך שם העיר, ופגעת חבל נביאים יורדים מהבמה, לפניהם נבל וטוב וחליל וכינור והם המתנבאים.
Yes, please.
וצלחה עליך רוח השם והתנבאת עמם, ונהפכת לאיש אחר.
Okay, we're going to spend more time on Pasuk Vav. We're going to come back to it, but what? That would be great. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Right, but I hope you picked up on the word salcha in Pasuk Vav, because it's like you took saltzach and you smushed it into one word. But in any case, you've got the third sign, which is that Shaul is going to meet up with a group of Nevi'im, Chevel Nevi'im, and they are going to be prophesying, and you are going to be prophesy with them. And in Pasuk Vav, he says, and the Spirit of Hashem is going to rest on you, right? V'tzalcha alecha, which is a little bit of a unique word, but we'll talk about it. But the tzalcha alecha ruach Hashem, v'hitnabeta itam, v'nefachta le'ish acher. You're going to become a different person. There's going to be a transformation. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so far so good? All right. Okay, so I think in the interest of getting through information, I'm going to kind of summarize bit by bit what the Malbim says here. Okay, because
This whole thing of creating Shaul becoming like Ish Elohim, it's very private. Like it's not in front of.
correct. And it stays private, which
Different.
is different. Exactly, which is different. And
It's just between him and the local, there's no.
for the moment.
Well, so is David, when David is anointed, it's also.
Okay, so it's one of the questions that the Abarbanel actually asks, right? Is
No,
that,
later. Remember
right.
when he goes to the house and he's anointed and he's still,
Right.
nobody knows.
right, so the question, the Abarbanel, true Abarbanel form asks a whole bunch of questions. And one of the questions is exactly that. Why is this whole process so private? Oh, you might want to say that let's compare it to David's process, which was also private, right? Shmuel comes to the house, goes through the brothers. Finally, Hashem says, he's the one, right? Light shines on his head, big neon sign, right? He's the one. But with David, there was a very practical purpose for it being so private. Shaul was still king, right? So Shmuel could have done, remember Shmuel even says to Hashem, like, what? Like, I'm going to be tried and hanged as Mori b'malchut, and appropriately so, right? So Hashem says, so take with you an animal, and if people ask you why you're going to Beit Lechem, why you're going to Beit Yishai, just tell them because I'm going to be Makriv a korban. Which is very acceptable at that point, right? He's the Navi, he's showing honor to the head of the Shevet, Beit Lechem Yehuda, which is the main city. Great. With Shaul, the question is a little bit deeper. Why is this whole thing so private? And it gets even, I'm going to leave the question hanging for the moment until we get even further into the story, because it gets even more mysterious. So what the Malbim explains, and again, I've only brought you an excerpt if you want to read the whole thing, and it's exquisite, and it's a real treatise on the elements of Judaism. You could even, like, instead of the elements of writing, the elements of Judaism. What the Malbim says is follows. Each of these three groups represent the people that Shaul is going to now rule over. So group number one, which are the people who just start talking to Shaul, and what they talk about are the goats, or the donkeys. He refers to them, Akatarishon, the first group. These are what he calls anashim behemiyim. Now that doesn't mean animalistic. What? Lay people, right? But even like the workforce, blue collar, we would call it in America, the agrarians, the people for whom their lives are the day-to-day, concrete, very literally nuts and bolts life of being shepherds. And in a way, we're kind of turning back to Hevel, right? We're going all the way back to Hevel. And we tend to think of Hevel as being the tzaddik and Cain as being the rasha, right? Because Cain commits murder and Hevel has the korban that was accepted. But let's think of for a second a little bit more deeply, in the sense that number one, the korban was Cain's idea. That's number one. And number two, if we think about Hevel's name, right? He's named like nothing. He's named air, vapor. And Rav Hirsch writes a beautiful essay there about the contrast between the nomadic, what we might call hunter-gatherer or shepherding class, and the agricultural, which then becomes the merchant class, and like the pros and cons of both. Right? And that it's not so clear who's the villain and who's the tzaddik here. But what the Malbim is writing about is that the very basic lay people, the ones that are uneducated, the ones that might even be somewhat boorish and unmannered, and what they focus on are the animals and focus on the job that needs to get done. They're not particularly polite. They don't necessarily care about deep, intimate relationships. They're not soulful people. They might not even be particularly intelligent, and they're certainly not intellectual people. But you need them. You need those sheep. You need those farmers, right? You need people to deliver to clean the garbage and clean the streets. And you need people like that to get the job done. Otherwise, the society doesn't run, and you have to respect them as king. So that's sign number one. Sign number two, you're moving up a little bit, right? You've got three people, number one. And number two, these three people ask you how you are. So there's he calls it kat enoshi, right? The human. Now, again, it doesn't mean that the animal people aren't human, but it's the next group of people who are more interested in polite congress, right? Conversation. They're more educated. They're more civilized. They understand the ways of the world. They're a merchant class.
Aren't they a bit more spiritual?
They're also more spiritual, right? These are what we would call your regular Balabatisha people, right? They're the ones, they go to shul, they come home, they make Shabbat, they come home, they learn, they go to shiurim, they come home, right? That these are people who care about ben adam lamakom, ben adam lachavero, they care about education. They're educated, they have commerce, right? They're carrying stuff. If they're carrying the stuff, that either means that they themselves produce the stuff, or it means that they bought the stuff. And if they either produce the stuff or bought the stuff, it means that, again, that these are people who are going to be in one place. They're going to be a little bit more stable. They're going to be more educated, and they're going to be more spiritual. And the fact is that they're heading to Beit El. They're heading to the spiritual place. And then the Malbim goes into a whole conversation about wine and meat and bread, but these are the trappings of a korban. So clearly where they're headed to the mikdash or the bama at the time, and they're headed to give a korban, to do avodat Hashem. And they offer Shaul bread. Right? So it's not just that they say hello, they give him bread. And why bread? Because it's number one, it's the most fundamental element. And number two, it's the most portable. Right? The Malbim explains, it wouldn't make sense for them to offer him the goat because then he'd have to sacrifice it and he'd have to prepare it. Wouldn't make sense for them to offer wine because then he wouldn't be able to continue on his travels. Right? So they gave him the bread. Very practical. Also very mystical, but we're not going to get into that. And then the last group that he meets, which is obviously the highest group, is what the Malbim calls the kat nafshi, really, right? Or the purely spiritual people. And for the Malbim, the life of the spirit is it. He doesn't really hold very much by the life of the body or by the life of the flesh or by the life of money or commerce. For him, the life of the spirit is everything. So the Nevi'im are the highest group. Right? And that's, by the way, why it's called a chevel Nevi'im. They're no longer even individuals. They're now a group that's bound together. And that's the other thing. He's like that once you're a Navi, you can put aside your own individual needs. And because you understand that everything is l'shem shemayim.
What's the idea of the Tzadei Plishtim?
That these are the group of people that you have just now conquered. It's Shmuel's way of saying to Shaul, you're going back kind of to where you started, which was that battlefield. And in a way, that's another thing, by the way, that the Malbim says, that the lechem and this mention of Plishtim in the next one is to say to Shaul that you grabbed the Shnei Luchot from Goliath. He's going based on that midrash. In other words, you know what's important. You vanquish the enemy physically, but you also vanquish the enemy spiritually, and you grabbed from them that thing that is the most precious. Okay, all right. So what I want to look at now is look at Pasuk Vav with this, what's going to happen to them, and I want to look at this first place called Tzach and the idea of Tzalach. So what the Malbim explains is that Tzach is actually an homage to Shaul's ancestors, right? Tzach, a bright or a pure shadow. They remember that Shaul's grandfather, right, Aviel or Ner, was the person that lit up the darkness. So the idea of Vitzalcha, and think of the idea of lahatzliach, right? Litzloach is a tzlochit, is a capsule, right? So the idea lahatzliach means to basically to grow, to puff, to become larger, whether it's larger three-dimensionally or whether it's larger two-dimensionally, like a tzalachat, right? But the idea of hatzlacha is something where there's an interface between you and it. In other words, as opposed to that the ruach of the nacha alecha ruach Hashem, right? That it just rests on you. Vitzalcha alecha ruach Hashem almost means like ruach Hashem is going to come into you, is going to expand you, and is going to allow you to become successful. I don't know if that makes sense. Right? It's almost, yes, I'll repeat it. נכון, exactly. Vitzalcha means to allow you to move from place A to place B. Right? It's not static. Right? Ve'alta alecha or v'nacha alecha ruach Hashem, which is very often the case. right? Is the idea of that it rests on you, but then you're not moving. Adarabba, right? Lahaniach, oh, you could be lie down, right? It's both passive, but it's also to some degree it's almost static, right? Vitsalcha, I like the way he explained it. It moves you, right? It inflates you, it enlarges you. Some of the Mefarshim say that this Ruach Hashem is what gave him greater physical strength, and it's used later in Parak Yudam. Right? But that somehow that this Ruach Hashem allowed Shaul not only to receive Hashem, but to to act on it. Right? Imagine almost like you take a pipe or a cork and you remove it. And then all of a sudden things can flow in and flow out. That's what's going on here. That what's happening to Shaul is that the Ruach of Hashem is able to flow into him. And as a result, his own spirituality and his own, and this goes back to what we talked about with the mental illness and the predispositions, right? Let's remember who Shaul was. He is somebody who is very humble. He's somebody who's very connected to Kibbutz Av. He's somebody who is very sincere. And we're going to see this even more. And all of this soulfulness, right? You can kind of imagine him as this shy but very strong silent type. That is happy to be the shy, strong, silent type, and really doesn't want to be in the front of the class. Not so much what he's interested in. Okay, we're going to go on. And then all of these things come to pass. Okay. Not only do they come to pass, but if you go on in the text, right? Tzipi, I'm going to ask you to kind of go down another pasuk or two. So I think we're up to pasuk like Chet, where it happens that Shaul meets the Chevel Nevi'im. So let's go from there.
Should I read something or skip it? Read it?
Start from like pasuk Chet.
Okay, Chet. וירדת לפניי הגלגל, והנה אנוכי יורד אליך.
Keep going. I'm purposely skipping that pasuk.
Okay, text. והיה כהפנותו שכמו ללכת מעם שמואל, ויהפוך לו אלוקים לב אחר, ויבוא כל האותות האלה ביום.
Yeah. Okay, so they all came true. Keep going.
ויבוא שם הגבעתה, והנה חבל נביאים לקראתו. ותצלח עליו רוח אלוהים וינבא בתוכם. ויהי כל יודעו מאתמול שלשום, ויראו והנה אם נביאים ניבא, ויאמר עם איש אל רעהו, מה זה היה לבן קיש, הגם שאול בנביאים?
Okay, so this is like the omniscient narrator kind of sticking something in, which is really bizarre. But the point is that this event of Shaul becoming a Navi became such a big deal. In other words, it started off as something so small and so private. It became such a big deal that eventually it became an expression of something that's unbelievable. Like what? Shaul, now you're telling me that Shaul is a Navi? Like that seems, so that expression entered the language. Go ahead.
ויען איש משם, ויאמר ומי אביהם, על כן הייתה למשל הגם שאול בנביאים. ויכל מהתנבאות ויבוא הבמה. ויאמר דוד שאול אליו.
Okay, so 1 second. So now he gets to this, remember the Nevi'im are also on their way to daven. So, or to do korbanot. So he gets there and he meets his uncle. Uncle is not named. Interestingly, the uncle is not named by even by the Mefarshim. But we only know one uncle of Shaul, and that's Kish's brother, Ner. Right? So seems that it's this Ner guy that he meets, but to me it's very telling that he's actually not mentioned, because we know that Avner, who's his son, who's Shaul's nephew, right? Do I have the generations right?
Shaul's cousin.
Abiel had,
Avner ben Ner.
right, Avner ben Ner. Kish and Ner were brothers. Right, so Ner is his uncle, Avner is his cousin. Right. Okay, I got it. Keep going.
Okay, those who allowed an halachtem. Vayomer levakesh et ha'atonot v'nir'eh ki ein v'navo el Shmuel. Vayomer Dov Shaul, agida nali, ma amar lachem Shmuel. Vayomer Shaul dodo, haged higid lanu ki nimtzu ha'atonot. V'etvar hamlucha lo higid lo asher amar Shmuel.
Okay, even more silence. Now here's something interesting. I think it was 2 days ago, 3 days ago, somewhere in the last few days of Daf Yomi, this story comes up. Right? And there's a big debate about, who Mordechai is and who's he's descended from. And one of the lines in the Gemara is that the fact that Shaul was so tsanua that he did not tell his uncle what happened with Shmuel is what gave him the zechut to later give rise to Mordechai and Esther.
It's
the same
another
words.
point of view, that because he's not saying maybe it's a lack of belief, a lack of understanding
Right.
what's really going on.
Right,
But it's
for
also
sure.
the same words as the Megillah, lo higido. right?
Lo
Because there's
higida,
no, like,
exactly.
They'll think he's a lunatic, and
Right,
who is he to
right.
say I'm a king?
So, but I'm saying the Gemara and Daf in Megillah, and I think if we're up to Tet Zayin now, I want to guess and say it's like Yud Bet or Yud Gimel. It was somewhere in the last 4 days or so. That exactly. Lo higida Esther et Amave et Moladata, that it goes back to this. So this idea of tzniut, of not saying what's not, you haven't been told to say, or that you've been told not to say, is very much present. Very, very telling that he does. I mean, again, he's been anointed king. The signs have come true. He had every reason to finish the story and say, and Shmuel told me this and this and this was going to happen, and this and this and this happened, and hi, here I am, king of Israel. He doesn't do that. And it becomes clearer and clearer as the story goes on that he doesn't do it because he doesn't want the job. He really doesn't want the job. Keep going.
Why did you not really want the job?
Why didn't he want the
No.
job?
You not really didn't want the job, as Moshe Rabbeinu didn't want the job.
Exactly.
But they did not talk, they did not say that it happened. It's kind of, Shmuel is trying to kind of, did it happen? Is it real? Is it not real?
Right.
What are they gonna think of me if say I'm gonna be king?
Right.
Like,
And again, I just want to remind everybody, and this story is going to come back at the end of Perek Yud. That always keep in mind Pilegish Bagiva. You can't forget that. I can't understate how present that story is, right? So there might be a very practical reason why Shaul doesn't want to say anything, right? Like, because
But I don't think it's modesty, that's what I'm trying to.
I actually do think it's modesty. I really do believe that it's modesty and it's humility, and it's that Shaul at this moment doesn't want leadership, doesn't want power. He just wants to do, so to speak, the will of Hashem, and whatever that will of Hashem is, he's going to wait for instructions. And the reason I believe that that is the case, the reason for that hypothesis, is that when he then doesn't wait for instructions, finally, is when, to his horror, right, things go so bad and so wrong. He's very straight. He's very yashar. And the text tells us that, right, that he is a chayil and he's Yarei Elokim, and he's that very intense, very finely tuned string that when it snaps, it snaps. Okay, keep going.
ויצעק שמואל את העם אל השם המצפה, ויאמר בני ישראל, כה אמר השם אלוקי ישראל, אנוכי העליתי את ישראל ממצרים, ואציל אתכם מיד מצרים ומיד כל הממלכות הלוחצים אתכם. ואתם היום מאסתם את אלוהיכם אשר הוא מושיע לכם מכל רעותיכם וצרותיכם, ותאמרו לו כי מלך תשים עלינו, ועתה התייצבו לפני השם לשבטיכם ולאלפיכם. ויקרב שמואל את כל שבטי ישראל וילכד שבט בנימין.
Stop. Okay,
I'm really sorry, but what pasuk, where are you guys reading?
What?
What pasuk are we?
What pasuk are we?
Yes,
I just finished Perek Yud pasuk
You did.
Chaf.
Kaf.
I
Okay, so we
finished
just
studying.
read Parak Yud Pasuk Kaf. We're working our way through the text. It's not on the source sheet, but it is in the text. Okay, so Shmuel, so now they're in wherever they're supposed to be, and Shmuel gathers the people, and Shmuel says, again, you've rejected Hashem, and there's like a dot, dot, dot. You've rejected Hashem. And then what he starts to do is he gathers people by tribes. This should start sounding familiar. What? Fast forward a little bit. What's the next pasuk? He brings forth the tribes and,
ויקרב את שבט בנימין למשפחה.
I'm sorry, go back, read the last pasuk again. There's a word.
ויקרב שמואל כל שבטי ישראל וילכד שבט בנימין.
Vayilached Shevet Binyamin. When have we heard that expression, Vayilached Shevet X? It was later than that. Yehoshua. After the defeat of Ai, right, where 36 people died. That's it. It sounds like our numbers today, which is actually beautiful, right? When chas v'chalila, we lose one chayal in some kind of an operation, we're like, oh my gosh, one chayal died. As we should, by the way. Right? So Shmuel, so Yehoshua launches an attack on Ai. 36 people die. Yehoshua knows, okay, stop the press. Something is terribly wrong here. Now, we as the reader know what's terribly wrong. What's terribly wrong is that Achan went and took the cherem from Yericho, right? He took some of the stuff with him. He couldn't resist. So because one person took from this stuff that was consecrated to Hashem, 36 people had to pay with their lives. Now, Yehoshua knew that something was wrong. And in those days, when you know something is wrong, but you don't know what it is, you use the Urim V'Tumim method. And you bring people in front of the Urim V'Tumim, again, kind of like in a Star Wars movie, right? It starts lighting up, but they know how to read it. But that Lashon of Vayilached, right? Lachad means to conquer. You're trapped, right? So he brings the Shvatim. Now this happens with Yehoshua after something bad happened. So we have this image in our heads of, this is something not 100% positive is going on here. So Shmuel has everybody together and says, okay, people, you rejected God, and now open parentheses, and so now you're going to get your king. So the Shvatim start passing in front of the Aron, and then the Urim V'Tumim lights up by Shevet Binyamin. Now, before we go one step further, again, it's like, oh, it's Shevet Binyamin. And people are really confused because up until now, for the last few generations, Shevet Binyamin has been the source of our problems. Things are getting a little, you can almost imagine people kind of squirming there in the audience. Okay, so now we go from Shevet Binyamin, next pasuk.
ויקרב את שבט בנימין למשפחתו, ותלכד משפחת המצביא, וילכד שאול בן קיש ויבקשו ולא נמצא.
Okay, so now they divide Shevet Binyamin into their families. By the way, there aren't that many families. So it's the family of Shaul that is separated out. We don't have the next description of the whole family shows up. We just know that we go from the Shevet to the family to Shaul. Where's Shaul? And Shaul cannot be found. It sounds like a children's story, right? It's Shaul. And again, he's hiding. Keep going. Where is he hiding? They literally have to ask the Urim V'Tumim again, which means they have searched everywhere and somehow he's invisible. Go ahead.
ויאמר השם הנה הוא נחבא אל הכלים.
Hine hu nechba el hakelim. He has hidden himself to the kelim. Now, what are the kelim? And again, here we have a machloket amongst the various opinions. But the kelim can either be weapons, or the kelim could be the klei kodesh, the things that are used for avodah. And in a sense, that's who Shaul is, right? He is this caught between war and worship. And that moment of intersection between war and worship, both times, the time when he didn't wait for Shmuel, and then the fateful time when he kept the animals from Amalek, as opposed to slaughtering them and didn't kill Agag, right? That intersection of war and Avodat Hashem or Avodat Mishkan or whatever you want to call it, that's that intersection that's going to be his downfall. But right now, that intersection is where he's hiding himself. And successfully, I might add, right? It literally takes Hashem to kind of take that invisibility cloak off of Shaul. Go ahead.
וירוצו ויקחוהו משם, ויתייצב בתוך העם, ויגבע מכל העם משכמו ובמעלה.
Okay, so they get him, they bring him, and again, here he is, betoch ha'am, and it's clear that he is physically and obviously morally greater, taller, higher than everybody else.
Once he's finally found, he's very obvious.
Once he's found, he's obvious, right? Like how did this guy get away with being hidden that we couldn't find him? Go ahead.
ויאמר שמואל אל כל העם, הראיתם אשר בחר בו השם, כי אין כמוהו בכל העם.
Okay, here's an amazing moment for a director, right? What is the tone in Shmuel's voice here? We don't know, right? Is it Haraitem, behold, like this kind of sense of wonderment? Look at who Hashem has chosen for you. He's chosen the best. You rejected Hashem, you angered Hashem, and because Hashem loves you so much, he's given you the best there is. Right? That's option one. Option two is a tone almost of bitterness and of mocking, right? You see who Hashem has picked for you, right? You want somebody that looks beautiful. You want eye candy because that's the value that everybody else has in the outside world, right? Let's contrast it to Moshe, who had some kind of a speech barrier, whatever it was, but he certainly wasn't eye candy, and he certainly wasn't Mr. Charisma. So you can, the question is what is Shmuel's tone here? We don't know. We don't know if he's mocking Bnei Israel or if he's kind of praising Hashem and Bnei Israel. And again, it's a debate amongst the Mefarshim. You can hear it in your head any way that you want. I just wanted to raise both possibilities. Go ahead.
ויראו כל העם, ויאמרו יחי המלך.
Okay, sounds great. Yechi HaMelech, long live the king. Fantastic. We're done. Yay.
They accepted so easily. They accepted so easily.
Ish.
It sounds like, okay, here he is, yay.
Yay, right? Next pasuk, except not so fast.
וידבר שמואל אל העם את מצרים המופע, ויכתוב בספר ויונח בפני השם. וישלח שמואל את כל העם אשר איש לביתו. וגם שאול הלך לביתו גבעתה, ויאכלו עמו החיל אשר נגע אלוקים בליבם.
Okay,
ובני בליעל אמרו, מה יושיענו?
what pasuk is this?
This is pasuk Chaf Zayin.
Chaf Zion.
ובני בליעל אמרו, מה יושיענו זה, ויזוהו ולא הביאו לו מנחה, ויהי כמחריש.
Okay, so it seems like everything's yay, great, but not so fast. Already from the get-go, we have these people, they're called B'nai Belial. Anytime you see this phrase, B'nai Belial, Belial is a contraction, Belial. Right? Belial, Malchut Shamayim, whatever kind of Belial they are, they're intentionally bad. These are not just like grumbly, kvetchy kind of people. These are nefarious, up to no good kind of people. They publicly say, who's this guy? Which means, again, they're Mori b'malchut. And Shaul acts as a machari. Shaul would be within his right at this moment to have them killed. Not only would he be within his right, but political science, and certainly Machiavelli, would say, make an example right now. Right? These people are grumbling at you. You are the new king. You're the underdog. You're coming from a shevet that's small in number and whose reputation is somewhat up for grabs right now. And these people are publicly launching a smear campaign. Say something. And again, you see it as a sign of Shaul's weakness. The Mefarshim basically see it as a sign of his strength. Right? That again, Shaul's position right now is that this is not about me. This is not about me, the individual. This is about me, the servant of Hashem. What happens next, now we're going into Perek Yud Aleph, is again, you can kind of see it as a moment of beautiful closure. And sadly, this is the highest point of Shaul's kingdom and of Shaul's kingship. Right? We're kind of back into Sefer Shoftim. And I think, again, I believe that when Shmuel or whoever's writing this text is writing this story, he's writing it very deliberately. That the first thing that happens when Shaul is king, as king, is kind of a throwback into Sefer Shoftim, where we have an enemy. And it's not the enemy that we've gotten used to at this point, which is the Plishtim, right, on our western border. We now have the enemy back over on the other side of the Yarden, on the east, an enemy that doesn't really threaten most of Bnei Yisrael, and an enemy that is going to threaten one specific group of Bnei Yisrael, and it's a very significant group that it is. Go ahead, we're now in Perek Yud Aleph.
ויעל נחש עמוני ויחן על יבש גלעד. ויאמרו כל אנשי יבש אל נחש, כרת לנו ברית ונעבדך. ויאמר עליהם נחש עמוני, וזאת אכרות לכם ונמכור לכם כל אין ימים. ושמתיה חרפה על כל ישראל.
Okay. Nachash Amoni, Kishmo Kenhu, right, comes to Yavesh Gilad. Now, again, Yavesh Gilad is part of Shevet Ruvain. It's on the eastern side of the Jordan. It's a border town. But what was Yavesh Gilad? Scroll back to Perek Kaf Aleph in Sefer Shoftim. So if you have a Tanakh, you can flip back quickly. We're now after the third battle of Pilegesh Begiva, always going back to that incident. Bnei Israel make an oath and they say, we are not letting their sons marry our daughters, and we're not letting our sons marry their daughters. We're done with Shevet Binyamin. And which effectively means they're going to die off. Either they're going to die off just because there aren't enough of them, or they're going to end up with these, inbred genetic diseases because there are very, very, very few of them that are left. Comes along Tu B'Av of that year, according to the Gemara in Masechet Ta'anit, and Bnei Israel have Harata in Sefer Shoftim. It's in this like the next pasuk, and Bnei Israel are like, okay, wait, we feel bad. What do? We made a neder. We can't undo the neder, right? We don't have very good experience in Sefer Shoftim with nedarim being taken and having them been undone. By the way, Pinchas ben Elazar seems to factor into this story also, which means he's really, 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 really old, like as in 250 years old. I don't know. Take the names as you will. In any case, they're like, okay, wait, we need to do something. So they come up with an idea and they're like, wait, is there anybody who did not engage in this battle, right? Who maybe kind of deserves a little bit of a punishment themselves. guess who didn't get involved in the battle? Yavesh Gilad. This same city. So Bnei Israel are like, okay, fine, this is how we'll start. The people, rather than punishing Yavesh Gilad for their withdrawing themselves from the Kihila, we'll do a little bit of Mida Keneged Mida, and it's the people of Yavesh Gilad who are now going to be the first to marry in with Shevet Binyamin. And so that's kind of a truce. I'm not even going to say a repair process. So what Yavesh Gilad has been known for is actually removing themselves from the cloud. So in a way, the fact that Nachash HaAmoni is now coming to attack them, you could see as to some degree divine retribution, right? You removed yourself from the cloud. So now I'm going to punish you from removing yourself from the cloud by removing you from the cloud. Makes sense, right? So the people say, okay, we're going to go to the king. Right? We have a king now. This is what kings do. We have a king. Go ahead. Please.
So I'm starting to,
I think we're Pasuk Gimel.
ויאמרו אליו זקני יבש, הרף לנו שבעת ימים ונשלחה מלאכים בכל גבול ישראל.
Okay, so give us 7 days, and we're gonna send messengers. We're gonna figure this out. Okay, next pasuk.
ואם אין מושיע אותנו, ויצאנו אליך.
Okay, so if we don't have anybody to save us, right, and you can again read this as either on a very surface level, if we can't find a strong person, or if we get the word back from the Navi, or in Vitumim, whatever, that this is divinely decreed, then fine, we will submit to you.
ויבואו המלאכים גבעת שאול, וידברו הדברים באוזני העם, ויישאו כל העם את קולם ויבכו.
Okay, so they come to Givat Shaul, not necessarily because they're coming to the king, but because that's where some of the messengers happen to be coming to. They tell the people what happened, and the people start howling and wailing. Go ahead.
והנה שאול בא אחרי הבקר מן השדה, ויאמר שאול מה לעם כי יבכו.
Okay, and he's in the middle of plowing. He went back home, he went back to work, right? And he's like, what's going on? Why is everybody upset?
ויספרו לו דברי אנשי יבש, ותצלח רוח אלוהים על שאול כשמעו את הדברים האלה, וניחר אפו מאוד.
Okay, so now we have this again, this return of Ruach Hashem. That this Vatitzlach alav Ruach Hashem is this divinely infused, inspired, filled righteousness. He basically becomes now an instrument of divine wrath. He becomes the Matan, right? He becomes Vayichar Af Hashem. He becomes that instrument of Hashem's anger in a way that's appropriate. Again, probably channeling, tapping into, drawing on that intensity that is already in him. Go ahead and let's see what he does.
ויקח צמד בקר, וינצחהו וישלח בכל גבול ישראל ביד המלאכים לאמור אשר איננו יוצא אחרי שאול, ואחר שמואל כה יעשה לבקרו.
Does this sound familiar? Right, exactly. Right, so wait, one second, I just want to, again, for the people who are listening who might not have been able to hear you, right? So instead of taking a woman and cutting her up into parts, and instead of threatening the lives of the people who don't rally to the cause, he takes his own cattle, like the cattle he's probably been plowing with, then in there slaughters them. Again, imagine the strength that it takes to slaughter a cow, right? Slaughters a cow and says, okay, people, anybody who does not join in this cause to defend Yabesh Gilad, right? The same people who didn't help us, the same people who, who deserted us, anybody who doesn't, this is what I'm going to do to your property. I'm not going to kill you, even though you deserve to die because you're Morid b'malchut, but I'm going to harm your property. And he's doing this in the defense of people who did not rally to a previous cause. Go ahead.
ויפול פחד השם על העם ויצאו איש אחד. ויפקדם בבזק. ויהיו בני ישראל 300,000 איש יהודה 30,000. ויאמר למלאכים הבאים, כה תאמרו לאיש יבש גלעד, מחר תהיה לכם תשועה בחום השמש. ויבואו המלאכים ויגידו לאנשי יבש וישמחו. ויאמרו אנשי יבש, מחר נצא עליכם, ועשיתם לנו ככל הטוב בעיניכם. ויהי מחרת, וישם שאול את העם 3 ראשים, ויבואו בתוך המחנה באשמורת הבוקר, ויכו את עמון עד חום היום. ויהי הנשארים ויפוצו, ולא נשארו בם 2 יחד.
Okay.
ויאמר-
What does Shaul do? He unifies the people. Ke'ish echad. He unifies them under the banner of Hashem, right? He goes to the rescue of his people and he defeats the enemy, right? So like, again, that we think about that ma'agal of Sefer Shoftim. So we're now at the top of that ma'agal, but not only are we at the top of the ma'agal for Sefer Shoftim, but basically what we've done now is we've gone full circle to the point where Bnei Israel were almost completely killing each other, right? Almost decimated a shevet, where they come together to save a group of people. And at that moment, Shaul's kingship is solidified as kingship of Hashem. Everybody loves him. He's great. He's clearly the divinely inspired and the divinely important and divinely chosen one. Hooray! Yeah, for about a second. Okay, we're going to stop here. We're going to look at next week is kind of what starts to go wrong, like the madness of King Shaul. We're going to introduce David. Okay. Stay healthy, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. See everybody next week. Stay healthy. Is it me or is it warm in here? Thank you. It's really getting very nervous.
And I'm cold now, it's all good.
Because it's all about me, right?
I was schwitzing when I came in. It's like my body just can't regulate.
I'm not that old.
You know, you'd be surprised. My mother said it to me, I think I was in my early 30s and my knees were going on me, and my mother was like, "Is she young for that?" I'm like, "Yeah."
Are you a runner?
Yeah,
Okay.
only after.
Maybe there's an alcohol. Show me about